The king leaned from his carriage window and fixed his eyes directly on Bartholomew Cubbins. "Well, well," he demanded. Bartholomew shook with fright. "I ought to say something," he thought to himself. But he could think of nothing to say. "Well," demanded the king again, "do you or do you not take your hat off to the king before you?" "Yes, indeed, sire," answered Bartholomew, feeling greatly relieved. "I do take my hat off before my king." "Then take it off this very instant," commanded the king more loudly than before. "But, sire, my hat is off," answered Bartholomew. "Such impudence!" shouted the king, shaking an angry finger. "How dare you stand there and tell me your hat is off?" "I don't like to say you are wrong, sire," said Bartholomew very politely, "but you see my hat is off," and he showed the king the hat in his hand. "If that's your hat in your hand," demanded the king, "what's that on your head?" "On my head?" gasped Bartholomew. There did seem to be something on his head. He reached up his hand and touched his hat. Beep! The face of Bartholomew Cubbins turned very red. "It's a hat, sire," he stammered, "but it can't be mine. Someone behind me must have put it on my head." "I don't care how it got there," said the king. "You take it off." And the king sat back in his carriage. Bartholomew quickly snatched off the hat. He stared at it in astonishment. It was exactly the same as his own hat, the same size, the same color, and it had exactly the same feather. "By the crown of my fathers," roared the king, again leaning out of the carriage window, "did I or did I not command you to take off your hat?" "You did, sire. I took it off twice." "Nonsense. There is still a hat upon your head." "Another hat?" Again Bartholomew reached up his hand and touched a hat. Come, what is the meaning of all this?" demanded the king, his face purple with rage. I don't know, sire," answered Bartholomew. "It never happened to me before." The king was now shaking with such fury that the carriage rocked on its wheels, and the royal coachman could hardly sit in his seat. "Arrest this impudent trickster," shouted the king to the captain of his own guards. "We'll teach him to take off his hat." Beep. Poor wee Bartholomew, shaken in his boots. The royal coachman cracked his long whip. The king's carriage swung forward up the street toward the palace, but the captain of the king's own guards leaned down from his big brass saddle, grabbed Bartholomew Cubbins by his shirt. Away flew Bartholomew's basket. The cranberries bounced over the cobblestones and rolled down into the gutter. With a jangling of spurs and a clatter of horseshoes, the captain and Bartholomew sped up the winding street toward the palace. Out of the narrow streets up on the hill, Bartholomew clung to the captain's broad back. On and on they galloped, past the bright gardens of the wealthy merchants, higher and higher up the mountain, on past the walls of the noblemen's castles. Beep. There go all the hats. Flap! The sharp wind whisked off Bartholomew's hat. Flap, flap, 2 more flew off. Flap, 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 flew another and another. 4, 5, 6, 7. Bartholomew kept counting as the hats came faster and faster. Lords and ladies stared from the windows of their turrets, wondering what the strange stream of hats could mean. Over the palace drawbridge they sped through the great gates and into the courtyard. The captain pulled in his reins. "His Majesty waits in the throne room," said a guard, saluting the captain. "The throne room?" The captain dropped Bartholomew to the ground. "I'd certainly hate to be in your shoes," he said, shaking his head sadly. For a moment Bartholomew was terribly frightened. Still, he thought to himself, the king can do nothing dreadful to punish me, because I really haven't done anything wrong. It would be cowardly to feel afraid. Bartholomew threw back his shoulders and marched straight ahead into the palace. "Follow the black carpet," said the guard at the door. All through the long hallway, Bartholomew could hear the muttering of voices behind heavy doors. He won't take off his hat. No, he won't take off his hat. Beep. Bartholomew walked on till he stood in the very middle of the throne room. The king, in a long scarlet robe, was sitting on his throne. Beside him stood Sir Alaric, keeper of the king's records. He wore in his belt, instead of a sword, a long silver ruler. Lords and noblemen of the court stood solemn and silent. The king looked down at Bartholomew severely. "Young man, I'll give you one more chance. Will you take off your hat for your king?" "Your Majesty," said Bartholomew as politely as he possibly could, "I will, but I'm afraid it won't do any good." And he took off his hat, and it didn't do any good. Another hat sat on Bartholomew's head. He took off hat after hat after hat after hat, until he was standing in the middle of the great pile of hats. The lords and noblemen were so astonished they couldn't even speak. Such a thing had never happened in the throne room before. Beep. "Heavens," said Sir Alaric, keeper of the records, blinking behind his triangular spectacles. "He's taken off 45, and there were 3 more down in the town," said the king. "And you must add on 87 more that blew off my head as we galloped up the hill," said Bartholomew, trying to be helpful. 135 hats, most unusual," said Sir Alaric, writing it down on a long scroll. "Come, come," said the king impatiently. "Sir Alaric, what do you make of all this nonsense?" "Very serious nonsense, your Majesty," answered Sir Alaric. "I advise you to call in an expert on hats." "Excellent," agreed the king. "Ho, guard, fetch in Sir Snips, maker of hats for all the fine lords." The milliner. Into the throne room marched the smallest man, wearing the tallest hat Bartholomew had ever seen. It was Sir Snips. Instead of a sword, he wore at his side a large pair of scissors. "Take a look at this boy's hat," commanded the king. Sir Snips looked at Bartholomew Cubbins' hat and sniffed in disgust. Then he turned to the king and bowed stiffly. "Your Majesty, I, Sir Snips, am the maker of hats for all the fine lords. I make hats of cloth and gold, fine silk and gems and ostrich plumes. You ask me what I think of this hat? Pooh, pooh, pooh. It is the most ordinary hat I have ever set eyes on." "In that case," said the king, "it should be very simple for you to take it off." "Simple indeed," mumbled Sir Snips haughtily, and, standing on his tiptoes, he pushed his pudgy thumb at Bartholomew's hat and knocked it to the floor. Immediately another appeared on Bartholomew's head. Beep. "Screeby!" screamed Sir Snips, leaping in the air higher than he was tall. Then he turned and ran shrieking out of the throne.